Hi everybody. Give you an overview of the layout and explain some stuff for you. So first walk into the room from the hallway. Oak Hill is on the right. Chillicothe is on the 12-foot wall like I talked about the other day. And this is the expansion Chillicothe yard that I'm working on. So I sort of explained this before. I built Chillicothe first. It was in another bedroom. I decided to build Oak Hill. It'll be a completely separate layout, not connected in any way, but I could use the same equipment on it, carrying it back and forth. My wife suggested that I put them in the same room, so I did, and decided to put Chillicothe on this wall and Oak Hill on this wall, and I connected the two of them with a fictional bridge module. I negotiated space to build the Chillicothe yard over here, or an expansion. At the time, it wasn't necessarily going to be the Chillicothe yard. Geographically, this is all wrong. So if I was going to do it geographically correct, Chillicothe yard would be here. You would run east out of the Chillicothe yard through the Douglas Avenue Chillicothe switching area. And after 30 or 40 miles and getting onto the Portsmouth branch, you would go to Oak Hill here. That's the way it should be. But I decided not to upset the apple cart, move everything around, because I would have had to get rid of that. So I'm just operating it in this manner. The reason why I'm doing this video is to sort of explain, because I've got two DT&I run-through trains. They are completely separate trains. So I want to explain how it is in real life and explain those trains. Here's a map. I laid tracing paper over my 1907 Ohio Railroad map and traced out the lines. But the C&O line was not built in 1907, so I just had to sort of freehand it in following the N&W. So let me explain this. So the blue lines are the B&O. This is the Ohio division. Cincinnati would be over here, going to Parkersburg over here. Chillicothe's in the center. This blue line here, which I drove, that was the old CH&D, Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Dayton, which the B&O got in about 1916. It actually came on down south of Chillicothe, and south. I didn't draw all that in here, but it serves a purpose for later on. The DT&I is the orange line here. Came down through Washington Courthouse, Greenfield. This area in here was Summit Hill, very hilly, curvy, real bottleneck in operations of the railroad. So after 1980, when the Grand Trunk Western acquired the DT&I, they negotiated trackage rights over the old B&O, the CH&D. They got off in Washington Courthouse, ran down, joined with the B&O in Musselman Junction, ran through Chillicothe, got it across the river on the old CH&D bridge and got on the C&O, and basically they could take the C&O down to place called Greg's, and then they could run into Jackson to where their shops were and everything. And they had big interchanges with the C&O and Greg's and also at Wavewood. So at that point, this section right in through here was abandoned of the DT&I through Greenfield and all that. That was all abandoned. That lasted until about 1984 or so. They really didn't need the Jackson shops. The Grand Trunk Western had their own shops, so they closed it. And once the CH&D bridge in Chillicothe was condemned, they required a long backing move, and they just decided to just abandon the whole thing. So about 1986, 1987, the DT&I, or the Grand Trunk, did not run any farther south than Washington Courthouse, and they actually sold that to a short line. Okay. So one DT&I run-through train I'm going to have is that train that came down, would run through Chillicothe, and it was a mainline train. Usually had 3 or 4 units on it. I don't have one DT&I unit now, but eventually I'm going to try to get another 1 or 2. So it's just going to be simulated, but you'll see it running through Chillicothe, through the east end of Chillicothe, Douglas Avenue, but it will not go to Oak Hill. It'll just be, just a fictional train. Now the Oak Hill DT&I train in Jackson, the B&O had a Portsmouth branch. Came from Hamden down through Jackson, Wellston, Jackson, Oak Hill, and eventually went to Portsmouth, Ohio. They abandoned the southern part of the line in the 60s, but they still ran south of Oak Hill because there was a lot of business in that area. DT&I had trackage rights from Jackson through Oak Hill down to a place called Bloom Junction, and they went on down to Ironton. So once the chassis system was formed, and in the 80s and everything, they basically, B&O was trying to get rid of it. There wasn't much business left on the Ironton branch anyhow. They had a tunnel, which they had a lot of maintenance on it. So about the last train on the Ironton branch was about 1982 or so on the DT&I. But when you see me run a DT&I train run through Oak Hill, that is just the Ironton branch job. It will have one unit on it, just a few cars, and it's just a turn going out and back. At the end, it was only down to like one train a week, just a few cars. And even at the end, they didn't even go to Ironton because they had some problems with the tunnel, and they just decided just to run down and back. So anyhow, there's 2 separate DT&I run-through trains, but they're not the same train. So you won't see me run a train through Chillicothe, through Douglas Avenue, and then through Oak Hill because it'd be 2 separate trains. So I wanted to explain that to you. This red line is the C&O. I left the N and W off. This just for clarity anyhow. I'm going to do a separate map and explain the Chillicothe operations. And I'll stick a couple pictures in here and there of like the DT&I running through Chillicothe so you sort of see what that looks like. So let me add one more thing before we start talking about the Chillicothe. The Ohio Railroad is completely fictional. It's just something I made up. I love the sound of Alcos, and I thought, well, I know the B&O is trying to get rid of that trackage, so let's say that the industries in Oak Hill banded together and bought the trackage to guarantee they had service. So Oak Hill Industrial Railroad, that's all it stands for. But one last thing is all the DT&I did in Oak Hill and in Chillicothe after the Grand Trunk, merger was run through. They just had trackage rights. They did no interchange in either place. They didn't serve any industries. The interchange was in Washington Courthouse, Thrifton, Ohio, which is just around Greenfield, and then Jackson, Ohio is where they interchanged with the B&O. So let's talk about the Water Street switching area, or the Riverside Street switching area, whatever you want to call it. Very simple map. N and W, north and south. B&O, east and west, Chillicothe. Here's the depot. Of course, actually the B&O came up this way, but simple map. The area that I model now is Douglas Avenue. I got industries are down here. They're actually east of the yard and the shops. The original main line came through like this. When it got to the river, which is our city park is right in here now, it turned left and sort of went around the river. Eventually they built a huge embankment, the trestle at first, and they filled it all in and rerouted the river. The river is now over here. So this original main line just became a switching spur. In Chillicothe, they had the 1913 flood was historically the worst flood they've ever had in southern Ohio, and washed all this out again. So they actually reconnected this temporarily until they rebuilt this main line. But this stayed in place, a mile of it or so, as a switching area until the very end of the line. So I'm going to talk about what I'm going to model in that. So let's look at part of the original main line that I'm talking about here. This is the B&O main line. This is the part that they built after they changed the river. So it came down and it went basically west. The first switch off of it went to a coal dealer. And I'm going to put pictures in here. The coal dealer's structure is still there. So Bruce Ames, if you want to look on Google Maps, it's on Mulberry Street in Chillicothe. Still there, really cool place. Of course, there's no trespassing signs, but you can get good pictures of it from the street. No problem. It was in business in the 70s, although not very many people used coal to heat their houses in the 70s. It was still there. I remember seeing cars on that trestle. Come on down, there's an old warehouse. There used to be a canning factory here a long, long time ago. You can see the doors in the warehouse. But it hasn't received rail service forever, and it's a really small warehouse anyhow. Come down across Mulberry Street, there was a passing siding. Sort of the line sort of stayed in the grass to the north of Riverside Street, which ran down through here. There was a warehouse here. It had a curved loading dock on it. Again, I'll put a picture. That part has been torn off. The front part of the building is still there, but they tore off the back part where the railroad cars were unloaded. So the railroad tracks are just above the street, which is Riverside Street. You can see the curved loading dock, which was on the back of the building in the previous picture. That was torn down after rail service ended. Looks like the spur was on the side that you can't see anyhow. The pole yard that I've been talking about was directly on the other side next to that fenced off area. There's no poles here in this picture, but I remember it being there, so maybe it wasn't there for that long of a time. Coming on down, standard elevator, they had to come in and switch back. I think originally, if you look at the old maps, they could come straight into standard elevator, but when they built the new silos and everything back here, they couldn't do that anymore. They wanted more storage capacity, so they had to come down and switch back. So the original main line came on down here, and it ended like in the 50s. There was a power plant down here. That was all torn up in the 60s. They built a new high school. It was on the canal roadbed, which was just to the west of this line. The canal came down and went this way. So the line ended at that point at Yaktanji Boulevard, but it had enough of a switchback where they could go back and switch standard elevator. And the two cabooses in Chillicothe that are there on Water Street now sit right in here, and they're on the original roadbed of the main line, which was built in the 1850s through Chillicothe. So now I'm going to tell you what I'm going to model of these industries. So the yard is pretty much done. I have 5 tracks. They're all single-ended tracks. Of course, the last 2 aren't very long. I did stagger the ends, but I don't want to block the engine terminal. Now, I could have maybe added a little bit to each one, but I think the engine terminal is going to be sort of a focal point, and so I didn't want to block that. May have another track come around here. The Stewart Products that makes the fueling racks and all that stuff. I haven't been able to find one yet. They're all sold out everywhere, so I don't know. There's other options. Walters makes like the sand towers. I may have to scratch build the fueling racks, I'm not sure. Anyhow, so this is going to be the Water Street, Riverside Street area. So the switch comes off back here, goes back. They'll have to switch back into standard elevator. I'm only going to have two industries on it. Standard elevator and the pole yard, because I think that was all that was left toward the end. Pole yard is going to be on this side over here. Just be a flat car, bulkhead flat. The poles have some racks. Thing about that is it's very low. I don't want any buildings in here that's going to interfere with me switching the yard or block the view of the yard. So that's a perfect industry for that. I could model the scrap yard. It was on the other side of the main line in here somewhere if I wanted to, but I don't think I will. I think it'll just be a little job for a switcher to come out. I'm not wild about how close this track is right here. So what I will probably do is when I make my fascia, I'll probably bring it up a little bit and then make like a little hill out of, the foam or something like that, cover with ground foam. So if a car does tip over, it won't hit the floor. And right now there's a good chance it would hit the floor if it tips over. So I will probably do that. But there will never be long trains running on this. It'll be a switcher, 2 or 3 cars at the most. Slow speed switching. But again, I'll probably make this come up, maybe, 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch. Have just like a little hill there, like it's going through a little tiny cut. And that way if a car would fall over, it would just lean against that. No big deal. But everything in here is going to be sort of scrubby, low stuff. I don't want any high buildings or anything. The stock yards used to be next to the yard. I could have, and they were abandoned at that time. I could put some old stock pens in here. That might be a good scenic thing. That's where I'm at. I need to fill in all the ties, which is a real pain on these Pico Code 55 track if you've ever dealt with it. Fill in all the ties and paint the track, and eventually ballast the track. That's what I'll be working on. So that's it for now. That's it for the update. Mainly I wanted to explain the DT&I trains that you're going to see because they are 2 completely different trains. So I thought that might be confusing to some people. Have any questions or comments, let me know down below and I'll be sure to answer them. Everybody stay safe.